Welcome back. So we've talked about those trends in the general environment. What do we make of them? Well, this is where forecasting comes in. Um, I love Dilbert. So you see from the comic strip that I've got on the screen that Dilbert likes to make fun of people that forecast. And it's easy to make fun of people that forecast because if you think about it, they're like the weather forecasters, although their job is a lot harder now than weather forecasters today. They get it wrong, and sometimes when they get it wrong spectacularly, and we all get to make fun of them. And when they're right, we don't really think too much about it. So there's two polar opposites, or the two extremes of forecasting that we want to guard against. The first is I have to know everything before I can generate a forecast. And this drives you crazy because there's so much information and it always keeps shifting that this is what they call the paralysis by analysis. You'll never make a decision because you can never have a lot of confidence in the information that you're trying to act on. The other polar extreme is, oh, this stuff is going to change anyway. Why do I worry about it? You can't predict the future. Just get on and go along for the ride. A company that has basically can shift their strategy and can pivot, to use that great Silicon Valley term, maybe can get away with this. Companies won't survive if they're over here paralyzed because they won't do anything. You have to do something in the middle. And I'm going to give you an example of where two companies had slightly different forecasts, and it makes a tremendous difference in what they've done, and you can see a difference in performance. In the late 1990s, Airbus and Boeing were both looking at what's called the super jumbo market, what is now occupied by the Airbus A380. These were the size airplanes that were bigger than a 747. For Airbus, it was important because for many years, the 747, Boeing's product, had been the largest airplane. And kind of like automobiles, your profit margins on big airplanes were a lot less than your profit margins on small airplanes. And Boeing had the big airplane market cornered with the 747. So Airbus is anxious to get into this, but they're trying to leapfrog Boeing and come out with the super jumbo. In Boeing's case, they realize that if Airbus launches a super jumbo, it's probably going to cannibalize the sales of its highly profitable 747. So should they jump in with a super jumbo too? Now, these are enormously expensive development programs. You have to sell a lot of airplanes to make money on these things. And for a while, because the risks are so great, Boeing and Airbus actually talked about collaborating and jointly building a super jumbo. If you know the two companies, you know that was destined to fail because they kind of pathologically hate each other. So when those joint talks fell apart, it became an individual company decision. What are you going to do? Well, Airbus saw a growing need for international air travel and also in a premium on efficiency. And they thought the super jumbo with its four engines could take more passengers farther on less fuel, aka more efficient for the airlines, and therefore highly sought after. And they thought that these airplanes would be very popular between high density international destinations, for example, Singapore to Berlin. So they saw a very promising market. Boeing probably saw that same market, but they didn't see as big a one as Airbus saw. And when Airbus went all in and said, that's it, we are going for the super jumbo, then Boeing really had to question its market. Is this super jumbo market big enough for both of us to get in there and make money? Or is it just big enough for both of us to get in there and lose money? And incidentally, Boeing may have had to do that just to make sure that Airbus didn't get a huge advantage. They may have had to climb in so that they both lost money instead of letting Airbus make money. But Boeing's forecast said, you know, I just don't see this. We see international air travel as being more fragmented. People don't want to fly from Singapore to Berlin, or I'm sorry, or to Frankfurt, and then get on a smaller airplane and fly to Munich. They would rather fly from Singapore directly to Munich. And you really see this a lot in the United States, where you see airplanes that leave from, say, San Jose and fly direct to Tokyo. Well, that's what they call a thin market. And Airbus said, or I'm sorry, Boeing said, we see the future as long, thin markets, such that the super jumbos not going to be as popular. We think that an airplane that can very profitably serve these long, thin markets is going to be more in demand, which led to the 787. But Boeing had to bet on that forecast that the market for the super jumbo wasn't as big as Airbus thought it was, and go a different direction. And it really was a kind of bet your company sort of decision. I'm not saying that Boeing would have gone out of business had it developed the super jumbo, or not developed the super jumbo, and Airbus had, and Airbus been right in the market size, but it frankly would have put Boeing at a tremendous competitive disadvantage for a generation. Eventually, they would have had to have developed their own super jumbo. They would have been late to market, all that other stuff. It would have been bad. Today, it appears that Boeing's forecast was correct in that the market wasn't nearly big enough for them to both jump in with a super jumbo. Airbus is having some success with the A380. They haven't sold nearly as many airplanes as they thought they would. How much of that's attributable to the current economic conditions? Hard to say, but Boeing set a sales record for the most airplanes sold before it ever flown with the 787. Now we know that they botched the execution developing the airplane. That caused some issues, but it was a tremendously valued airplane when it was announced to the airlines. So there's an example. It's hard to know with precision what's going to happen, and you can analyze yourself and never make a decision. But if you're a company like Boeing and Airbus, you can't afford to shoot from the hip and just go with the flow, because you have major capital investments with major lead times involved. I want to make this personal for just a minute. How do you personally do forecasting? How do you think about your career? How do you think about what industries you want to work in? What I'd recommend is you start doing some personal forecasting. And to do that, I think you have to do a couple of things. First of all, and it kind of mirrors these two fields that we're talking about, you have to be smart about the general economic environment. Lots of ways to get information about that. You just need to get information. My personal favorite is to read the Wall Street Journal. I've been doing that for many, many years. I think it's a fantastic resource. You may have others. You may want to do blogs, whatever, but you want to stay aware of what's going on in the big picture. And then you want to get into some industry publications that really detail the guts of your industry to stay well informed of what's going on, which is going to be more of the competitor environment, but with a healthy dose of the general environment thrown in as well. In aviation, for me, for many years, I read Aviation Week in Space Technology. When I retired from the Air Force and went into academia and was reading other business stuff, I could still sit down and read an Aviation Week very enjoyably. I just don't do it anymore because I'm just not in the aviation industry, so I've had to throttle back the amount of time I spend trying to stay up on it. So you need to think about, what information should I be reading on a set schedule to stay up on these sorts of things? Because this is key to you having your own awareness as to what you think is going to happen in the world. Let's change gears now and talk about the competitor environment. And that is modeled by Porter's famous 5 forces. Now, I'm going to go out on a cliff and say, probably most of you have studied Porter's 5 forces before, but I'm going to tell you, I really don't think you understand Porter's 5 forces. So I'm going to ask you not just to take a test over it. I'm going to actually ask you to apply it in the real world, because I think it has a lot of applicability in the real world. But let me explain to you what Porter's 5 forces is about, and I need to step over and get a visual aid. I always say this is the hardest lecture for me to give because I have to have money in my wallet. And this time I thought I had plenty of ones. Actually, I had 4 ones and a 5. But for a second, we're going to ignore that 5, and we're going to treat it just like a $1 bill. Porter's 5 forces is a story about industry profitability. Specifically, who gets to keep their money. And so I'm a business in a particular industry. And this is my profit. These $5 are mine. And what happens is, oh, if the threat of new entrants go up, I have to take certain steps which erode my profitability. And now it's 4. And then my buyers become more powerful and they squeeze me harder on price, or I have to update up my services, and there's another dollar gone. And then there were 3. And then my suppliers get aggressive with me too, and they start to squeeze me. And then there were 2. And then the substitute products become a more viable competitor to me, and I have to do something to take care of that. And then there was 1, and it's not by accident I left the $5 bill, because then my competitors and I get into it, and whew, I lose a lot of money, and it's all gone. And suddenly, I'm in an industry with no profits whatsoever. So I want you to frame Porter's 5 forces as a story of profitability, and who is it specifically that gets to keep your money. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the threat of new entrants, and I'm going to use the threat of new entrants as I talk about this to explain a lot of the factors, the economic factors. So we're going to stick with this for a little bit of time. The threat of new entrants is greatest when there are low economies of scale, which is to say, a big boy doesn't have any particular advantage over smaller companies, and that invites a lot of smaller companies to join the fray. So I'm going to give you 2 opposite extremes of economies of scale. Let's look, for example, at the express delivery service, or whatever you want to call UPS and FedEx. There are real scale economies. If they have to transport material to a city, probably the more the better, so to speak. You can't make money flying an airplane half full. You want that airplane to be full. Likewise, if you're delivering packages in Wichita Falls, you don't want to just have 1 or 2 a day to deliver, because you have all the infrastructure cost. There's a lot of scale economies from having a lot of customers and able to do it a lot. Auto manufacturers, another great example of scale economies. Tremendous amount of money to build a manufacturing plant that you slowly make back a few cars at a time, or a car at a time, I should say, which, if you think about it, is why no auto manufacturers have entered the market in many, many years, because it's just so doggone expensive to do so. On the other end of the extreme are lawn services. How many lawn services do you see pop up every year? Why? What's it cost to enter the lawn service business? Oh, maybe $2,000 tops for equipment, for entry-level equipment, and an ad on Craigslist. I have a friend, a young friend at church, and he's unemployed, and so he decided he was going to open a lawn business. $2,000, he's in business, which is why they come and why they go. Low capital requirements, same. Well, I've really already talked about that. Low capital requirements, or my lawn business as well. It doesn't take any money to get into it, so lots of people do. But the capital requirements, it's not just a factor of, does it take a lot of money to get into it? It's a matter of, is it going to take a lot of money to get into it that's going to be really hard to obtain? Example, in the past 12 years in the United States, 2 major airlines have launched, JetBlue and Virgin America. I guarantee you, at the time Virgin America and JetBlue launched, nobody was saying, you know what we need? We need more airlines in the United States. We already had too much capacity. So how could they launch, even though they're very expensive? Well, there were investors who thought it was a good idea. So the mere fact that it's expensive doesn't preclude somebody entering. It's that it's expensive, and you're going to have a hard time persuading investors to invest. That's what's going to tend to hold new entrants out. The next point is really critical that you understand, and that's the idea of switching costs. And the reason I say that is, from a strategic perspective, switching costs, once you're in an industry, are absolutely your friend. You want to make it so that it's painful for other people to switch, or for people to switch to somebody else's products. You deal with this in your life already. Almost everybody has a cell phone. And so what do you sign? A cell phone contract. And they do that to make it hard for you to switch to another carrier. Uh, any sort of loyalty program is a switching cost. Hey, I've got 5 punches on my McAllister sweet tea card. If I go back X number of times, I'll get a free sweet tea. Where are we going to go to lunch today? McAllister's. So all loyalty programs are based around trying to create a switching cost. I'm going to give you two 21st century examples of switching costs that are just absolutely brilliant. The first is Amazon Prime. I don't know whether any of you subscribe to that service, but basically if you pay, I think it's $72 a year, then you get free shipping, or a free 2-day shipping on all your products from Amazon for that year. So I, business teacher, understanding all this stuff, Amazon Prime member, what do? I go and search for it on different places, and if the price is about the same, I go and buy it. Where? Amazon. Why? I've already paid for the shipping. Amazon Prime is one of the greatest switching costs going. And the last, I put my phone down on the counter, but your telephone is a great example of switching costs. You'll hear me talk about, I am not an Apple lover. I was never a fan of Steve Jobs, so I have a hard time supporting Apple products. But I have an iPad and an iPhone, go figure. I'd kind of like to switch, but why am I a little reluctant to switch to an Android product? One is a learning curve of time, that's a switching cost. But second, I've got all this money invested in apps. And so do I want to throw that away? How brilliant is it for Apple to have a proprietary based system? And you'll see in many cases, technology companies will develop proprietary systems that make it hard for people to change to other systems. That's a switching cost. But sometimes switching costs are even more subtly veiled than that. My last example is from the mortgage industry. To give you the Reader's Digest version, when I was selling our house in Lubbock, Texas, this is right as the economy was going south and we were moving to Wichita Falls. I knew from my study of the external environment that things were likely to get bad and fairly quickly, so I was very motivated to sell the house. So I went out and got a guy that I knew was an aggressive realtor, because I didn't want to fiddle around. I wanted somebody who was going to be aggressive in marketing my house and was going to give me good advice on what I needed to do to get my house in the most competitive position possible. And so he went through his spiel, and he got to the end of it not knowing that I had already decided he was going to be my realtor, and said, "We are so focused on you selling your house and so motivated to be a good partner that if we do not have your house on contract at the 90-day, or at the, I'm sorry, not the 90-day point, at the 60-day point, then we will discount our realtor's fee $1,000. And you go, oh, what a nice guy. I mean, we're together, we're simpatico. His interests are my interests. Kinda. If you've not sold a house in the United States, you may not be aware that typically you give a right to a realtor to sell your house for 90 days. If I'm being aggressive about selling my house and a realtor hasn't sold my house by the 60-day point, I'm starting to think, maybe I need a new realtor. And so this $1,000 back was not a, we're with you, man. This was a, if you switch to another realtor, you're going to have to recoup that $1,000 in closing costs. And it was designed to make it harder for me to switch to go to another realtor, because I knew it would cost me $1,000. Why that makes sense for the realtor to discount that $1,000 in their fees is that the majority of their expenses are in the front end when they first advertise the home. So in a sense, our interests were aligned, but I looked at him and I said, "Greg, you and I both know that's a switching cost, and I'm not going to be swayed by that." And he kind of gave that little smile like, "How did you get on to me?" Yeah, this is what I teach. All right, going to end the clip here, and then we're going to come back and finish up Porter's 5 Forces. See you in a minute.